Welcome to the Greater Irvine Chamber Business Insights podcast series, where we address challenges and ideas for early-stage and entrepreneurial business leaders. Your host today is Dave Cofaro, Interim President and CEO of the Greater Irvine Chamber.
So welcome to the Greater Irvine Chamber of Commerce podcast series. I'm Dave Cofaro. I'm pleased to be with you today. And today our topic is business transition planning. So we often talk about startups and early stage businesses, but there's another really important phase of the business life cycle, and that's transitioning a company to new owners. So the transition can be triggered by things like the retirement of the founder, the passing of a business principal, or just to make way to start a new venture. We see all of those things. And this topic is really pertinent today as there are more and more businesses in transition. So as we think about wealth transition across generations, a lot of that is businesses. So things like the silent generation retiring, baby boomers retiring and passing the baton on to the next generation in order to run the company. So with that, my friend, David Bowman, who is co-founder of Cadence M&A Advisors, is my guest today. Cadence is really a niche boutique investment bank that's focused on advising owners of publicly or privately held, family-owned, and entrepreneurial businesses. So, David, just to start out, in a sentence or two, what is it that sets your firm, Cadence, apart from others in the marketplace?
Well, thank you, Dave. I think investment banks, by definition out there, are typically designed or created to sell a business. That's their sole purpose, really, in creation. And as you know, we had our beginnings, our nascent beginnings inside of Wells Fargo with a broader goal. And that was to help owners transition what was typically their single greatest asset, their business. And the hope was not necessarily to be there for just a one-time sale, but to be there for many years to come, for generations to come, helping families that not only sold the business, but that didn't transition and manage that wealth. So it was really managing the wealth experience, of which the M&A or sale process is simply a single component of it, albeit a very critical one.
So with that, what is business exit planning and why does it matter?
Well, to me, when you think of business exit planning, it comes down to anything. If you plan for something, you tend to have a better result. It doesn't mean most business owners tend to think that they can always sell a business at any time. And I don't think it's necessarily not true. The question is, at what value? Is it a value that would really work? Is it a situation that would please you? Would it please your family members, your employees, your customers? So yes, you can do certain, anybody can have a garage sale. It doesn't mean it's the right way to have to sell or plan for something that's the most important climactic event of a business owner's life.
Mm-hmm. And I've seen the statistics. I'm sure you know these like the back of your hand, but something like more than half of business owners do not develop an exit plan or succession plan. What's behind that? Why do you think that's the case?
Well, to me, I have a saying, and that is the absence of a plan is a plan. It's not a very good one, but I think many owners are convinced that to address a topic which is emotionally sensitive, whether for them or for family members or somebody, there's often a fear. My personal theory, I have plenty of them, Dave, whether correct or not, and that is that, business owners don't want to hurt. There's somebody they're often trying to protect somebody, and often it's employees or a family legacy or something, and they feel that maybe they have to continue on with the business because for them to profit, somebody else has to be hurt, or there are various different reasons, if you will. But again, to me, the best way to assure family legacy, or to protect key people, or to protect customers, or to maximize value, or any of these things, is to actually say, death is part of life. The transition is part of life. If you plan for something, you're most likely to be able to achieve your objectives, not just for yourself, but for other people. And so I think planning is a critical part of family legacy, not just wealth, but also legacy.
Yeah. I would agree. I think sometimes it's that business owners, founders get so busy running the business, they sort of forget about themselves. And in a way, it's kind of like being a parent. You're thinking about your kids all the time and you just sort of forget you're a person. I think with business owners, you sort of forget planning for the exit, planning for succession is something that's really important. So with that, Would you talk about the difference between business succession planning and business exit planning?
Certainly. Well, if you're talking about succession, I mean, to me, in my eyes, you're really talking about how literally do you transition the business into the hands of whomever you wish to carry it forward, whether that's family members or some other person, for example, in that event. Whereas exit planning, you're really talking about just being able to step away from the business and sort of serve immediate, maybe personal goals. I tell business owners when they'll often ask and say, well, I'm having an incredible year. Why should I stop? This is a great year. Usually, by the way, that's the best time to exit because when things are going really good, it's the time when, life tends to be a bit of a sine curve. Whatever happens tends to come around the other direction. So you tend to want to sell when you don't have to, if you're looking to maximize value.
Right.
But really, when I think about all of those different things, it's just that if life is a finite commodity, and I tell most business owners is that if you really want to keep running the business for the next 5 years, if you have that fire in your eyes and passion, then by all means keep running it. You'll probably make more money, whatever comes, whatever tax event, whatever shock to the economy. You'll probably make more money, just by running it for the next 5 years and figuring it out then, or figuring it out over time. That's probably true. However, if, life is again, a finite commodity, if you wish to choose how you spend your last 10 or 20 years, what is the value of a day of your time, a week, a month, a year, and how do you want to spend it? And I've seen owners that do choose to literally pass away at the desk, and they value that. And I've seen other owners that say, no, I really want to tour the world and take that cruise and play golf and do these different things. And none of those things are right or wrong. To me, they're a matter of their personal choices. And so if somebody says, I don't want to be in my business for the next 5 years, I don't want to be here for the next, I only have 3 years left. Well, they need to start planning. They need to start that event and probably should have started it already.
So that sort of takes us to something you said, not planning is still a planner. You've made a choice, right? I think there's a saying to not make a choice is to make a choice or something
Correct.
like that.
Right.
What are the consequences of not developing a clear exit plan?
Well, great question. To me, when you think of selling a business, people will say they have various different goals. Maximizing price. I've rarely encountered an owner that says, I don't really care what my business sells for. People tend to care what their business is going to sell for. And so if that is among many various different goals, taking care of employees and family legacy and various different things, but price is always a given that it needs to be at least fair valuation. And if you're going to sell a business for fair valuation, you can't just assume that at any given point in time, you're going to be able to achieve that. COVID, for example, when that shocks your business and your costs go up and your profit falls through the floor, how can you sell a business at maximum profit when the business has been damaged? What if there's an economic event, a war, anything like that can happen? These can all damage the prospects of a business. So a business has to be not only performing well itself, but it should also be the overall economy, the macroeconomy, which is the universe of buyers and sellers, should be performing well as well. So what you're looking for, I liken it to when stars align. When you see one or two or three or four stars that align where the business is doing well, the overall economy is strong, price for businesses is strong, there aren't any macro shocks in the economy, that's a good time to sell, because selling a business is not something you do in a week. It tends to take planning. It can take 9, 12 months. It can be shorter. But, given that time frame out there, when you see those stars align, I always tell owners, when that window opens, you leap through it. When it isn't open, when the window is closed, be patient. Wait. Make sure the business is ready. Don't jump and sort of have a bad event. But when the window is open and the stars have aligned, don't dither. Take advantage of that opportunity and maximize it.
Right. So at the Greater Irvine Chamber, we've got folks that are early stage startups. Their businesses are just getting going, some who have been in business for a little while and some who have been in business for a long time. What is the right time to start taking action on an exit plan?
I think there's another saying, Dave, which is it's never too early to plan. And that's always true. That being said, I think like most of us are, we tend to not be quite as proactive as we probably often should be. And I would tell an owner it's not that you can't, everything's going really well and you can't commence a sale process and get a sale done in a year, or 3, even 6 months if somebody's knocking on the door. But typically from a planning perspective, if you're doing your estate planning and you're planning for employees and maximizing value, yeah, I would say you're looking at at least 1 to 3 years sort of in advance, ideally 5 years, where you sort of come back and say, let us look at, do I have the right, a good example would be, do you have the right employee base around you to supersede or take over your roles? If you don't, if the business owner is everything, and typically most business owners have taken their whole lives because they're very talented, and some of them times they become everything. And what happens is they become irreplaceable. And if an owner becomes irreplaceable, if they go to sell, they almost become the business. And that means that the very goal that they have of stepping away, they can't achieve. Because if they step away, there goes the business. So I always tell owners, this is the one time in your life where your objective is to make yourself irrelevant. You've been critical all these years, and you have to work to make yourself irrelevant. Well, how long does it take to transition or develop a senior team around the owner that knows the best customers and knows the pricing schemes and the inventory and all these nuances, of the business? It can take years to do that. Some businesses, they already have a good team in place and they're doing well, and maybe they don't need, and maybe they need some time to do some succession planning and, whether they want to set up a trust or whatever. Those are faster. But if they need time to develop people, it can take several years sometimes.
So as you're describing this, David, one of the thoughts that comes to mind is there's a whole lot of EQ that has to be applied, emotional element to this, because we're talking about humans. We're talking about an emotional attachment to our businesses. In some cases, it might be ego, or it might be fear, or it might be family legacy and things like that. How do you navigate that human element of it? Because it's not just the numbers, it's the people. How do you deal with that?
Well, when I think of business owners, Dave, when you go back in life, those personality tests they tend to give, us back in college, and they say you're either a dominant personality or type red or whatever the colors they describe. Well, the one thing I think about that is most business owners, whether it's the red or the dominant, most business owners aren't the person that says yes to everybody. They tend to be strong personalities for good reason, because they're driving a result and they're doing something that often other people wouldn't do. It's not always not a hard and fast rule, but it's a general rule. And I always say, when you take a business owner and then you put that owner with a buyer, now what you're dealing with is the same type of business owner, but their business is 10 times larger. Again, that person is not a mild person who simply says yes to everything you want. They're a hard-charging type of individual. And so if you put a situation where you're putting this together, where a buyer and seller are both striving for this maximum result, you're going to have conflict. You're going to have a situation where maybe things need to be said in a way that is perhaps not the direct way of saying it. There needs to be some nuanced approach to it. So a lot of what my role, frankly, in a transition is for owners is to manage that communication process and that flow of information, to make sure the owner is not always put on the spot in that situation where it's a conflict situation. It's managing relationships, if I could use such terms about that. And so, I think your question was, what are some of the nuances and challenges of doing this? And the very challenges are interpersonal. Much of the role that I have out there, sure, 20 to 30% of it is financial, accounting, having command of the numbers and explaining what they are. That is critical. But a large portion of it, a majority of it, is frankly managing and working with relationships. It's the one time, I always say, for owners that are expert in their business, where all of a sudden they're going to find themselves in a situation which is foreign to them. And that is, they're going to be outside of their comfort zone and element. They're going to be dealing with a sale, which is the first time they've ever encountered in their entire life. And they're going to have to deal with a buyer who is incredibly expert at doing sales, who does this every single day of their life and is the same personality. But now they're going to be the ones who's expert in the transaction, whereas the seller is not. And the seller typically needs that. They need that representation, if you will, to kind of come up to speed so they can keep pace with that type of a buyer. So it's a roundabout way of saying challenges are: know what you're getting into, know who your buyer is, know what you're going to be facing, and arm yourself with the appropriate team to be able to handle that. It's not meant as a commercial. It means the appropriate legal counsel, accounting support, representation. Seller doesn't have to have it, but it's not a bad idea because the buyer is quite expert. And so having that team around them can tend to lead for a much more satisfactory output, I think, or outcome.
Yeah, that all makes sense, because it's so much of it is preparation, and so much of it is really understanding the human element. So that 70-30 guidance that you're suggesting says it's so important that someone like you who's comfortable with these kinds of transitions, where you do this regularly, but for the business owner who you might work with, it's a once in a lifetime experience, preparing for it, working through the transition, and then afterwards.
Well, Dave, when I think of my profession out there, I consider myself one of the most fortunate people around because I get to live every day working with people who are the American dream. They built something from nothing. They created it. And if you ask me, they're the smartest person in the room. They always have been. That's why we're here to help them. It's just that one time in your life, if you will, that you're facing somebody who is far more experienced than the owner themselves. And you're right, preparation will make all the difference in the world.
Yeah. You just described our members, right? These are folks who are working hard, building their businesses, living the American dream, and doing an amazing job. So well said. So what are some of the most important considerations in preparing a privately held business for sale?
I think the most important one for me out there, it's really multifaceted. It's what are the owner's goals? And I mentioned before that generally maximizing price is often the primary goal. But what are secondary goals? And those may be perhaps the business was founded by the owner's grandfather or grandparents or something like that, and they don't want to see the name on the door change, and they're afraid that if they sell it, they have to lose the family legacy. And or another concern is maybe what happens if the employees, are they going to be taken care of and watched over? Sometimes employees are almost more family than family. They've been together so close with the owner that they feel an obligation. Or what if the customers of the owner, which are almost, again, such close friends, what if the customers found out? What would be the implications to the business out there? Concerns about confidentiality. And even to minor concerns, such as they own the building and what happens if a buyer doesn't keep leasing it and they're left with an empty building. I mean, these are all goals, or these are all concerns, if you will, that owners can have. And I always tell an owner, understand what your goals are and recognize that probably all of your goals are achievable, not separately. You don't have to worry about maximizing price and then hurting your people. If your goals are multifaceted, you generally can achieve all of them, but recognize them. And then again, to your words, plan for it. If you're trying to be, it often depends upon what type of buyer universe you're approaching. If you approach the wrong buyer universe, you're going to get the wrong result. If you know that you want a certain type of outcome, well, tailor the approach through an advisor such as myself under consultation with the right buyer universe, a buyer universe that will be willing to address all of those goals, not just one or two of them, but all of them. So again, planning, understanding what the goals are for an owner. And I mean, if an owner's goal is simply maximizing price and none of those other goals matter, well, that simplifies things. People understand you need to be talking to the broadest set of buyers possible. And that delegates or directs us to how we would handle the marketing outreach. We can talk to one buyer, or we can talk to 100 or 200 buyers. We can manage and tailor a process, but we need to know what the goals are so that we're effectively, handling or achieving those goals for an owner.
I love that idea of being clear about what success looks like, because if you're not, you can't possibly be happy with it. And it is such an emotional thing when you think about selling your business, transitioning your business, exiting your business. You want people to feel like they made the right choice. And the best way to do that is to know what success looks like, define the goals in advance. So we've talked about how important it is to plan, to think about that exit 3 to 5 years in advance, preferably. What are some of the most common mistakes that you see when business owners navigate an exit?
To me, again, the biggest ones would be probably trying to hold too much control over the business, and that is not letting the employees be trained enough. And what happens is the very act of concentrating control, all the decision-making process, makes the owner irreplaceable. And that means the very thing that the owner wants, which is they're going to sell the business, they want to be able to step away and do other things. Well, that they can't do it because a buyer is going to come back and say, without you, the owner, we're going to lose everything. And so it complicates your ability to transition. So I would say not the lack of the ability to delegate and transition, build a support team that can transition, succeed beyond the owner. That's a very large one that's out there. Another one would be typically to focus on decisions, if you will, that maximize EBITDA. Company, which is, most owners have heard the words EBITDA, and many of them are familiar with it, but EBITDA, in my eyes, is really the pure financial engine of a company. If you take away all the noise, all all the personal owner vacations where, maybe they talked to a client, but that was for 5 minutes and they were on vacation for a week, but it was a business expense, or the family member that's employed in the business and really is not doing as much, things like this that are happening out there. Any kind of personal expenses that a buyer wouldn't continue, that most business owners, that a large portion are doing, is when you strip all that away and you pretend as if none of that happened, which all can be done, by the way, on paper, kind of in a pretend scenario. You don't have to stop doing it, but you have to figure out what the pure earnings engine of a company is, and you have to focus on maximizing it, because most buyers are really going to come in and they're going to say to an owner, I will trade you the next 5 years or 7 years or 10 years or whatever of that number, and I'll give you that money today if you give me the business. And so if you, as an owner, many owners have spent so much time, Dave, in my opinion, kind of pretending that they don't make money. It's an exercise, and they're quite skillful at it. So rather, I refer to it as financial artistry. They have my respect. But my point of it is that sometimes we can become so good at it that we lose sight of what a business really is making. And imagine when you go to a buyer and you no longer know what your business really is making because you've kind of confused, you muddied the water so much. So I would also say not having control of their numbers, not knowing what their true profitability is now, historically, and where it's going, not working on the transition plan with people. These are all common elements that most owners don't address. And then when they go to sell, they rush into the situation without command of and they really need to be in command. They and their advisors need to be in command of the field.
Yeah. So for those who may not be familiar with EBITDA, would you describe what that is?
Certainly. The definition of EBITDA is earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. And colloquially, I would just say EBITDA it's basically taking net income and then adding back all the numbers that are kind of pretend or nonsense. And by way of example, depreciation, that's a made-up accounting number. You can depreciate fast, slow, you can do all kinds you can manipulate it. Anything that's manipulatable, you want to add it back. Interest, that happens if you have debt. Some people view debt as evil. Some people think debt's wonderful. It's neither. To me, it's neither. It's just a matter that if you choose to have it, interest is the byproduct. And so it's arbitrary. Business doesn't have to have it. Taxes, either you're an S Corp and you don't pay them, or you're a C Corp and you do. It's arbitrary. So anything that's arbitrary, it needs to get added back to net income. And I always say most owners with about 5 minutes of training can sit around the kitchen table and figure out what their EBITDA is. There are other things. They need to add back all the personal things that they're doing. If they're taking a $2 million salary and market's really $300,000, they need to add back $1.7 million. Or if they got hit with a slip and fall lawsuit last year, first time in 20 years, that's not going to happen every year. They need to pretend to add these things back. Normally, that's what we do for an owner. We look at the numbers and we do that. But having an basic understanding of it provides real power to an owner so that they're really in control of their numbers. Because I can tell you, Dave, in the beginning of my career for the first 10 years, as you know, I used to be a buyer. And the last thing you want to do is to give control of your numbers to the buyer and let them know more about your numbers than you know, because nothing good will come of that. A buyer is not going to pay more money just because they're feeling generous that day. They're going to pay more money because you force them to, by telling them that if they don't, somebody else will. And you need to know your numbers to be able to accomplish that.
Such an important message, know your numbers. And it's sort of easy to lose sight of that sometimes, but I've seen so many companies in my consulting work where leaders of the business really don't know clearly what's making money, what's not, what's a disproportionate risk relative to the return they're getting. Yes. So they're engaged in activities that are far beyond the return they're getting from them because they're higher risk to the firm, and they just don't have a real clear picture on that. So great advice. So coming to the close of this conversation, I'm going to ask you one takeaway, and you only get one takeaway would you like our audience to keep on top of mind as they think about business exit planning?
Recognize when the stars align, when the window is open for maximizing the value of your business, and when you see it, leap through that window. Do not pause, do not hesitate, be decisive.
Do not pass go. Love it.
Correct.
Well said. David Bowman, partner, Cadence M&A Advisors, thank you so much for being on today's podcast. Appreciate it. All the best to you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, Dave. Take care.
Folks, thank you so much for joining us today. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you for joining us for the Greater Irvine Chamber Business Insights podcast. To stay informed about upcoming podcasts and other important business news, please subscribe to our channel or check the Greater Irvine Chamber website.